Hey guys, Sean here from Sea Travel. Today we're going to be doing an overlook of how I mix vocals for a modern pop song. Here we go. So a couple of things before we start the breakdown. In my opinion, 50% of what ends up being perceived as a good vocal mix really does come down to the editing of the vocal before you do any sort of mixing. So that would mean manual pitch correction, manual time correction. And that's not just on the main vocals, that's throughout. The main vocal, the backing vocal, the doubles and everything. So all of that combined really does make a big difference in terms of how clean and how big you're able to get the vocals to sound. So editing is not something that you should skimp on. So the second thing is the recording. You want to make sure you get as clean as a vocal booth or a room as possible to record in, because that is going to make sure that you get a very clean vocal recording. Then you're able to have so much more flexibility in terms of processing, because you're not bothered by noise, you're not bothered by room modes and all that extra stuff that could be happening. So yeah, with all that said, let's get into the video. The song that I'm going to be using today is Saranghae by Munesh. This song was done a year prior to its release date, so the methods and the techniques used in this video might differ from what we use today, but the fundamentals of it is going to be very similar. Alright, let's take a listen at the vocal track itself, processed by itself.
Baby, why can't you see you're one and only, hanya kau di hati.
With the track,
Baby, why can't you see you're one and only, hanya kau di hati.
Yep. So first off, we're looking at the vocal stack here. Today we're going to mainly focus on the main vocals and the processing that goes with it. So here you could see there are 5 source tracks, and what these are is basically the raw vocal files, and we process them separately, 5 instances of it, before we go into the main vocal bus to process all of them the same way. The reason we're doing it is because we had 2 separate recording sessions for this song. So it turns out that the vocal tone from each session is slightly different. So that's the reason that we have to sort of match the tone first before we can then process all of them together the same way. So the adjustments on tone that I did here, you could see, let me bring it up real quick, is the 4 EQs over here. So you can see that they are sort of a little bit different compared to each other, but there are 2 of the same thing. The reason for that is just because we have different levels for each track, and that adjusts for the sort of the gain of it almost before it goes into any further processing. I just find it easier to do it that way. But we adjusted the tone to then go into the main vocal bus. Also, on the 5 of these tracks, there are a little bit of cleanup work that we did before we send it to the main bus. So here are 2 pitch correction plugins. I will list the plugins on the screen, and what they're doing is just basically very minor kind of pitch correction, and that is essential for modern electronic music production. So the pitch correction plugins are just basically adding a little bit of extra correction from what we missed during editing. So, okay, next plugin here is a RX mouth declick by Isotope. What it does is it cleans up all the clicks and pops and the saliva sounds that you have in the vocal recording. So let's solo the clicks and hear what it does. Yeah, it's like ASMR. That's over a part that sounds like this.
Mahu bersendirian, tanpamu hilanglah wanita pujaan.
So yeah, it cleans up all of that. This is going to be important because when you start adding compression and when you start adding a lot of like saturation, boosting highs and all that, it's going to become a lot more obvious than it is right now. So yeah, the next thing in the chain is just the tone adjustment EQ that we went through before that. So cool. Now all 5 of these tracks combine into this vocal bus right here, and we can then minimize it. So right now, after all that is clear, we're going to take a listen at the before and after of the processing. So this is before,
Baby, why can't you see you're one and only?
After.
Baby, why can't you see you're one and only?
So let's bypass all of that and we'll take a look at the first stage of processing that we did. So first off, this is how the first stage of it sounds, before and after.
Baby, why can't you see?
After.
Baby, why can't you see?
So not a lot going on just yet. We have a little bit of compression, a little bit of high boost, a little bit of cleanup in the frequencies. So the first plugin that we have is an EQ. What it does is we did a bit of cleanup of the sub frequencies. We did a little bit of cleanup in the low mids area. Next thing that we have is a compressor. What this one's doing is just 6 dB of gain reduction to just compress the vocals. Very, very good compressor, by the way. The third one that we have is a mix unit that does EQ, that does a bit of compression, does a little bit of transient control, and also a little bit of saturation. So the way I use this is I use it to clean up the low end a little bit, reduce a bit of bass, and then a bit of compression and round off the transient slightly. There's no added saturation intentionally, so it's all zero right here, the drive of it. Cool. The next one that we have here is another compressor. It's a low level, high level compressor. What it does is it brings down the loud parts of the vocal and it brings up the softer parts of the vocal. What this does is it balances the vocal and it brings out a lot of details in it. So you could see why we needed the cleanup before this, because if not, all the clicks and pops would be a lot louder at this stage. And next thing that we have is an EQ. It's a passive EQ that I use for boosting highs. So I boosted a little bit of 16K right here, used the attenuation to sort of balance it back a little bit. And yeah, basically just a high boost. Cool. So right after this stage, what I would do at this point is I would send this copy of the vocal signal that we just had into 2 of these tracks. So it's the exact same copy, but we process it differently. So it's sort of like a parallel processing method. What we do here though is we pan one copy to the left 100%, the other copy to the right 100%, and what's on each of these tracks is basically a little bit of pitch shift. So pitch down the left side by 3 cents, pitch up the right side by 3 cents. So what this does is it creates sort of a sterilized image of the original vocal. So let's hear how it sounds without any further processing.
Baby, why can't you see?
So as you can hear, it's a lot wider, it's not mono anymore. So I would then take that copy of that stereo signal and EQ it in a way that takes out a lot of low end, takes out a lot of top end, scoop out a lot of mid range to sort of just create this stereo layer of the vocal that is just the body of it. So let's hear how that sounds.
Baby, why can't you see you're one?
Yep, so a lot more muffled, and I would then use this as a layer and mix it in with the main vocal. So I'm gonna put it loud right now. Let's hear it with the main vocal and without it. So without first.
Baby, why can't you see?
With.
Baby, why can't you see?
So yeah, not exactly obvious, but a little bit wider. And I'm gonna lower it to the level that I would usually use it. Let's hear it.
Baby, why can't you see?
So basically very, very subtle, just a little extra body, a little bit extra width. And yep, let's go on to the next stage. So these two combines into this vocal bus right here. And let's hear the before and after on that. Before.
Baby, why can't you see?
After.
Baby, why can't you see?
So as you can hear, quite a bit more compression, quite a bit more highs, some lows here and there, but it's in a very balanced way, it's not overbearing. So let's take a look at what happens under the hood. So first off, what we have here is a multi-band compressor. We're gonna view the differences of it before and after separately afterwards. because it's quite important. Next thing that we have is an EQ. What I did here is a little bit of high boost, about 8K, and a bit of like low mid boost, not much at all, about 220, and more low mids EQ, about 2 dB at about 180 Hz. The next thing that we have here is a sort of readjustment after we did the EQ. The purpose of it is to sort of take off any harshness in the mid-range, especially after that. So it's basically a balancing act that I basically do it step by step as I go. Whenever I feel that something is too much, I would then insert an EQ and just sort of readjust it. Alright, next thing that we have here is two de-essers. The first one is set to be a bit more extreme and takes off a wide range of sibilants, or like wide range of frequencies. And the second one is sort of a narrow band. It's because I felt that there's still a bit of harshness left after the first de-esser, so second one. Alright, let's take a listen at the effects of the multiband compressor before and after. Before?
Baby, why can't you see you're one and only?
After?
Baby, why can't you see you're one and only?
So this would be more obvious with the track playing in the background. So before.
Baby, why can't you see?
After?
Baby, why can't you see?
So a lot more forward, a lot more above the track instead of being drowned by the track. And that's the big thing about the multiband compressor, is it balances throughout the frequency ranges. So you have different bands and all of that will be balanced according to the way you want it. So you can then make that specific element to really just sit exactly where you want it in the whole track. Alright, so on to the next stage. What I would do at this point is the effects. So I would do some reverb, I'll do some delays. So the first reverb that we would look at is a very short and bright reverb. So let's take a listen at the reverb itself.
Baby, why can't you see you're one and only?
Yeah, so very, very short. What I do afterwards is I then EQ out a lot of the mid-range, a lot of the low mids, the lows and all that, so to just keep it bright. Okay, let's hear that with the vocal itself, without.
Baby, why can't you see?
With.
Baby, why can't you see?
So it just adds a little bit of air, adds a little bit of a stereo image, just make the whole vocal wider and sits a little bit better in the mix. Right, next thing that we have here is a room reverb. And let's hear the reverb by itself. Alright, so this is slightly a longer reverb, but not too much. What we have here is a Valhalla Room. It's a very, very good reverb for electronic music or just any modern pop song because of how clean it is and how smooth and consistent the reverb is. Alright, so before the signal enters the reverb though, we have a de-esser that is set to be extreme. It takes off a lot of the highs, and so we also have a lo-fi plugin that takes off a lot of the highs as well before it goes into the reverb. The purpose of that is to make sure that we don't have a lot of sibilants in the reverb, because you don't want your reverb to sound like all the time. So that's why we do it. The reverb will also sound warmer and just more balanced if you do that. So after the reverb, what we did was we cut off quite a bit of low mids from 250 and below, and then we did a bit of mid scoop to just sort of make it fit better with the main vocal. And here's the interesting part, which is a sidechain. So this reverb is actually sidechained to the main vocal, the same signal that we're sending into the reverb. The purpose of that is so when the main vocal is happening, we want the reverb to dip down a little bit so it's cleaner, and when the main vocal finishes and it dips down, we want the reverb to then come up and fill up the space. So the sidechain helps us achieve that and makes everything a lot cleaner actually. Let's take a listen at the main vocal with the reverb, and you can actually see the sidechain in action.
Baby, why can't you see You're one and only, hanya kau di hati.
Alright, so the next effect that we have, it's a delay called H delay that I really like by Waves. And the same thing we have entering the delay, we have a de-esser, and then we have a lo-fi plugin to just essentially take off the highs. And after the delay, we have a bit of a similar EQ, just cutting off a bit of mid-scoop to just make it fit better with the main vocal. And here we have a mid-side EQ that we cut a little bit of the middle channel to sort of widen it slightly and make it sit better, but nothing too complicated or too big here. So this delay is actually sidechained a little bit more in comparison to the room reverb. Let's take a listen at the delay itself. Yep, with the main vocal.
Baby, why can't you see? You're one and only, hanya kau di hati.
So there we have it, the effects that we have in the main vocal. So then what we have next is all these combined into the main vocal bus that I processed together. So the before and after. Before sounds like this.
Baby, why can't you see?
Cool. After.
Baby, why can't you see? You're one and only, hanya kau di hati.
So that's how it sounds in the final version of the production. And what we did in this stage is then we have an EQ that sort of looks complicated, but it actually isn't. It's just very, very, very minor adjustments of each band to just sort of make it fit better with the track and kind of take off any sort of harshness or any boominess, any sort of resonant notes, right? As you can see with this, to just make it blend well together with the track. And we have two dynamic EQ bands that will sort of dip down when the frequency at that band is getting too loud or too much. So let's get a visual of what it does.
Baby, why can't you see? You're one and only, hanya kau di hati.
Alright, the next thing that we have is another EQ just to sort of generally adjust the tone. We have a separate EQ here because the bands over here are a little bit too many, so it's easier to work on separate EQ. So the third thing that we have here is another EQ that boosts the highs. So in this case, it's at about 16K, so a little bit of boost over the top. That's why after this stage, it gets quite a bit brighter, a bit more clean and more balanced. So with the track before and after, here's before.
Baby, why can't you see? You're one and only, hanya kau di hati.
After.
Baby, why can't you see? You're one and only, hanya kau di hati.
You can hear that this final stage really just cleans things up, blends it in with the track. So yeah, there you have it. That's the breakdown of the vocal mix for this song. So if you like that, leave a like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.
Hold me close, hand to hand as it goes. Feel it, breathe it, don't you let go.
No added saturation aside